I love that, and I appreciate it because, if it's, the newness of our friendship, you're able to see that and think about the friends I've had for a really long time and their experience of watching it and going, oh my gosh. And then people that I reconnect with all these years later who literally can go.
On Meghan Markle's 45th birthday, one of her closest public friends said nothing. No card, no photo, no message. And this was not a distant acquaintance. This was a woman who the year before had posted gushing public tributes to Meghan on the very same day. Then, a few days later, that same friend, a hugely successful entrepreneur named Jamie Kern Lima, promoted an episode of her podcast. The subject of the episode was how to argue with a narcissist, how to spot one, how to deal with one, and one chapter of it carried a particularly striking title, No Response is a Response. Meghan's name was never mentioned, not once, not anywhere in it, and that the silence where a warm tribute used to be, followed by a podcast about narcissists, with no name attached, is exactly why this birthday has become one of the strangest royal stories of the year now. Before anyone jumps to a conclusion, there is something important we need to separate, and it's the reason I'm making this video instead of joining the pile-on, because most of the coverage of this has gone straight for the throat, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not here to diagnose anyone with anything. I'm not qualified to, and I'll be blunt. Neither is anyone else making videos about this. I'm not going to tell you Meghan is a narcissist, because I don't know that, and nobody typing furiously online knows it either. What I'm going to do instead is walk you through exactly what happened around that birthday, the real observable facts, who went silent, who didn't, what Jamie Kern Lima actually did and didn't say, and one detail about that birthday that is genuinely strange no matter which side you're on. And then I'm going to ask the question underneath all of it. Is the internet watching a real pattern here? A woman whose famous friendships have quietly cooled one by one? Or are we watching a crowd so primed to see a story that it will build one out of a silence and a coincidence of timing? Because the honest answer, I think, is stranger and more human than either side wants it to be. A quick word before we start. I don't deal in cruelty for its own sake. There's an ocean of that already, and you deserve better than to be handed a person to mock for 20 minutes. What I do is lay out the evidence and let you think. If that's the kind of steady, honest royal coverage you've been looking for, do subscribe. It's free, it's one tap, and it's the only way to be sure the next one reaches you. Now, let's look at what actually happened. Let's build on solid ground first, because the solid ground is genuinely interesting. Here's what's confirmed. Reported by mainstream outlets, observable by anyone. On Meghan's 45th birthday, only 2 people publicly wished her a happy birthday. 2 friends named Tracy Robbins and Kelly Zaffin. 2 public messages for one of the most famous women on the planet. Now let me say the fair thing once clearly, because it's the frame for this whole video, and then I'm going to trust you to hold it. Only 2 public wishes does not mean only 2 people care. Plenty of friendships live entirely in private. A text, a call, a card in the post. Many people find publicly announcing a birthday wish a little strange, so this is not proof of loneliness. It's proof of 2 public messages. That distinction between what we can see and what we assume is the whole ball game here. I'll trust you to carry it. I won't keep repeating it, because here's the fact with a real edge to it. The people who went quiet this year were in many cases loudly public the year before, and the clearest example is the one at the center of this story. Jamie Kern Lima. You need to understand who she actually is, because this is no minor acquaintance. She co-founded a cosmetics company and sold it to L'Oreal for over $1 billion, becoming the first female CEO of a L'Oreal brand. Best-selling author, major podcaster. And this is the part that matters. She and Meghan were genuinely, visibly, recently close. Let me establish that properly, because it's what makes the silence land. In April of last year, Meghan gave her very first ever podcast interview as a guest, and she gave it to Jamie Kern Lima. She sat down on Kern Lima's show, Makeup Free, in sweatpants, in an intimate, emotional, hour-long conversation between 2 real friends. And days later, Kern Lima returned the favor, appearing on Meghan's own podcast. This was not a passing connection. It was a genuine public mutual friendship on full display barely a year ago. So this year, the contrast is real, and I won't pretend otherwise. Warm public tributes last year. This year on the day, nothing. And then, days later, that podcast about narcissists. That's the engine of the whole story. Now, if this were the only strange silence, there might be no story at all. But it wasn't. And to understand why people noticed, we have to look at what was actually inside that episode. Here is the single most important fact in this entire story, and it's the one the angriest coverage races straight past. Jamie Kern Lima never said Meghan's name. Not in the episode, not in a caption, not in a single line connected to the post. There is no sentence anywhere in which she says, or even hints on the record, this is about Meghan. On its face, the episode is exactly what it claims to be. a general self-improvement conversation about dealing with difficult people. Narcissism is one of the most popular subjects in that entire genre. She'd even had this same expert on before. So, two honest readings, side by side. The suspicious reading. Look at the timing. Look at the history. A woman who posted warmly last year goes silent, this year, on the day. And then, within days, promotes an episode about spotting a narcissist and how no response is a response. That's not a coincidence, this reading says. That's a message. Pointed, deniable, deliberately unnamed. The kind of thing you send when you want the target to feel it and everyone else to see it, while keeping your own hands clean. You don't name the person. You describe the behavior and let one specific face go hot. And I'll be honest, that reading is not stupid. If you wanted to build a subtle public signal, it would look a lot like this. But here's the innocent reading, just as available. Jamie Kern Lima's entire business is content about self-worth and difficult relationships. Episodes about narcissists are a staple of that genre because they're what her audience wants. Millions of people have a difficult person in their life and want tools to handle it. She'd covered this exact topic with this exact guest before any of this, and she never mentioned Meghan because quite possibly it simply wasn't about Meghan. As for the missing post, people drift. Sometimes there's no dramatic falling out at all, just a friendship that quietly cooled. So, which is it? Here's the thing you have to sit with. A podcast with no name in it is, by design, a mirror. If you already think Meghan is difficult, you see a coded attack. If you already like her, you see a coincidence being weaponized. The episode itself contains no answer, only a reflection of whatever you brought to it. Hold on to that, because it's the first real clue to what's going on here. And it's not the only silence people are reading, because Jamie wasn't the only person people noticed. And this is where the internet stopped looking at that one podcast and started looking backward, across years of Meghan's famous friendships. The names being cited are serious ones. Serena Williams, who by many accounts helped open doors early in Meghan's career. Beyoncé, who once sent a supportive text Meghan featured in her Netflix documentary. The Clooney's wedding guests who once lent the couple a private jet. The Beckhams. Idris Elba, who DJ'd the wedding reception. Several famous names once publicly warmed toward her, all absent from the birthday online this year. And the suspicious reading writes itself. The one every competing video runs with. These people made her, opened the doors, showed up, lent the jets. And now, one by one, every single one has quietly stepped away. That can't be an accident. A friendless woman abandoned by the very people who built her. But let's actually think about it, because this is where the pattern starts to wobble. A missing public birthday post is the thinnest possible evidence of anything. Do you publicly post a happy birthday message to every friend you have every year on the day? Almost nobody does. These are some of the busiest, most heavily managed public figures alive. The idea that a missing Instagram post from Beyoncé proves a severed friendship is, said plainly, an enormous conclusion drawn from a very small nothing. And yet, here's the honest half the smear versions skip. Some of these cooling relationships may well be real. Public friendships do fade, especially when one person leaves an institution, moves continents, and becomes a lightning rod. That's not sinister. It's what happens to a great many celebrity friendships, which were often built on proximity in the first place. So the honest position is the messy middle. Have some of Meghan's celebrity friendships cooled? Probably yes. Does a list of people who didn't post on one specific day prove a coordinated total abandonment? No. Those are two completely different claims, and the coverage collapses them into one. But there is one proposed explanation for the cooling worth taking seriously, because it's the only part of this that offers an actual mechanism instead of a vibe. And here's the twist. What if the pattern has nothing to do with Meghan's personality at all? There may be a far less personal explanation, and it's the rare part of this story that isn't just people projecting. Some commentators believe that many of the figures who've stepped back have connections to the king or to royal charities like the King's Trust, and that for them, public association with the Sussexes has simply become complicated, not because they've decided Meghan is a bad person, because the calculation is quietly obvious. In a contest between staying close to the reigning monarch and staying close to the couple who left the family under a cloud, the monarch is the safer bet. Nobody needs to hold a meeting or take a vote. People each work it out alone and arrive at the same answer. That theory isn't proven, and I'll flag it as exactly that. But it illustrates something important, and it's the thing to carry out of this whole section. Distance doesn't always mean dislike. Sometimes it means caution. What looks from the outside, like a verdict on someone's character, can just be institutional gravity. A lot of careful people independently choosing not to antagonize a king. That's not a story about a friendless narcissist. It's a story about the quiet, enormous pull of the monarchy. Which brings us to the one part of this birthday that no theory can explain away. The one detail that didn't require us to interpret anybody's silence. Among the small handful of public birthday tributes Meghan received, one came from an account called As Ever. The message read warmly, "Happy birthday to our founder. As Ever is Meghan's own company, her own brand." And in the context of a birthday where people were already counting who had and hadn't spoken publicly, that detail naturally drew attention. I'll leave the innocent version on the table too, because it's fair. Companies post about their founders all the time. It's ordinary brand building. It means nothing on its own. That's true. But of everything in this saga, this is the one beat that doesn't dissolve when you examine it. Because it doesn't require you to interpret a silence or decode an unnamed podcast. It's just a plain, slightly awkward fact, sitting there in a week that was already about who did and didn't speak. That's the one hard beat. Now, this is where the whole story changes. Because when you step back and lay it all out, the honest answer to "is the pattern real?" requires holding two ideas at once, which is the exact thing the cruel versions refuse to do. Some of this is almost certainly real. Meghan does appear to be in a genuinely difficult stretch, professionally and socially. The Jamie Kern Lima friendship does look, from the outside, like it has cooled. The contrast between last year and this year is stark. Some celebrity connections probably have faded. Whether through that institutional gravity or through the ordinary way, public friendships dissolve when the proximity ends. There's a real texture of isolation in the picture, and pretending otherwise would be its own dishonesty, but an enormous amount of what's sold as proof is nothing of the kind. A podcast that never names her, read as a coded attack. A list of people who didn't post on one day, read as coordinated abandonment. A coincidence of timing, read as a smoking gun. And notice, the most damning parts are always the ones that can't be checked. The secret meaning of a silence, the hidden target of an unnamed episode. Certainty that lives entirely in the gaps isn't evidence, it's projection. Here's what I think is really happening. The internet has settled on a story. Meghan is friendless and falling, and now every neutral fact gets pulled into it as confirmation. A missing post isn't a missing post anymore. It's a data point. A general interest podcast isn't a podcast. It's a coded strike. This is one of the best documented things about how human beings think. Once we've decided on a narrative, we stop seeing evidence and start seeing confirmation. Everything fits because we decided in advance that it would, and that's the real story here. Not a woman and her friendships. Us. And what we do with a blank space. Jamie Kern Lima never named Meghan. Some famous friends didn't post publicly. Meghan's own company wished its founder a happy birthday. Those are the facts. Everything else was interpretation. And perhaps that's what makes this story more interesting than the internet's version of it. Because a silence is a blank space, and human beings cannot bear a blank space. So we fill it with suspicion, with loyalty, with whatever story we already wanted to believe. The person who dislikes her fills the silence with guilt. The person who likes her fills it with coincidence, and the silence itself just sits there, meaning nothing, while everyone argues about the meaning they poured into it. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for Meghan Markle. She's immensely wealthy and powerful, and she doesn't need our sympathy. I'm asking for something harder and more useful, a little suspicion of our own certainty. Because the real lesson of this strange birthday isn't about a duchess at all. It's about how easily a crowd takes a handful of silences and builds them into a story so complete it feels like fact. And that's worth noticing the next time you read a silence as an insult, a missed call as a verdict, an unanswered message as proof of what someone secretly thinks of you. No response is a response, the podcast said. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes a silence is simply a silence, and the whole story lives in what we decided it meant. That's the honest version. It's less satisfying than the pile on, but I think it's the truer one. And in the end, the more interesting one too.